A single sheet of paper held $1 billion lie. The late Mr. Al-Rashid's will, signed in sweeping Arabic calligraphy, left everything to a distant nephew. Lawyers were convinced. Family nodded. But a waitress setting down a coffee tray saw what no one else could. The calligraphy was too flawless, its flourishes too uniform. She knew from her grandfather's hand that true strokes always vary. That quiet observation would expose a forgery, unravel a nephew's scheme, and redirect a fortune to schools for the underprivileged, just as the billionaire had always promised. The conference room at Al Mansur and Partners smelled of old money and fresh suspicion. Layla entered not as a claimant, but as a server, balancing a silver tray of Arabic coffee. Her uniform marked her invisible, but her eyes were trained by years of watching her grandfather's reed pen dance across parchment. The late Mr. Al-Rashid lay only hours in the grave, and his last testament sat on the mahogany table, ready to be read. Lawyers adjusted their cuffs. The distant nephew, Karim, suppressed a smile. The family braced for the fortune to land where no one expected, in his hands alone. But Layla's gaze kept returning to the signature. The looping calligraphy was beautiful, too beautiful. And in that instant, the question that would unravel everything took root. How could a waitress see what the experts missed? Layla had not planned to be at that reading. She was filling in for a sick co-worker, pulling yet another double shift at 28, her fingers still stained faintly with the scent of cardamom from the morning's brew. She knew the Al-Rashid name, of course. Everyone in Dubai did. The billionaire had dined at Al-Fahidi's nearly every Thursday for 7 years, always at the corner table with a view of the old souk. He tipped generously, spoke little, and sometimes stayed long after closing, sketching school blueprints on napkins. To the staff, he was not a titan of industry, but a quiet dreamer who believed education could heal the region's wounds. But tonight he was gone. A sudden heart attack, the news had said. And in the hushed conference room of the city's most prestigious law firm, his final wishes awaited revelation. The senior partner, Mr. Al-Mansur, cleared his throat and lifted the document with ceremonial gravity. He was a man built for moments like this, oiled beard, tailored bisht, voice calibrated to bill by the hour. Flanking him were 3 junior associates, Karim, the nephew, seated closest to the head of the table, and an assortment of distant relatives who had rarely visited. Layla poured coffee, moving clockwise, her presence unremarkable. But her mind was elsewhere, drifting back to her grandfather's cramped workshop in the old quarter of Damascus, where the walls were papered with calligraphy exercises and the air smelled of ink and turpentine. She had spent her childhood there, watching the old man's reed pen dance across parchment, learning to distinguish the natural tremor of a human hand from the mechanical sterility of imitation. He had taught her that calligraphy was a record of the soul. Every stroke carried the writer's breath, their heartbeat, their momentary hesitations. A machine could never replicate that. It was a lesson she had never expected to apply. Mr. Al-Rashid had been a man of deep contradictions. Born in a fishing village in Oman, he had built a shipping empire that stretched from Jeddah to Jakarta. But his true passion came later in life, after a visit to a refugee camp in Jordan. He had seen children learning mathematics in a tent, using sticks to write in the dust because they had no pencils. Something in him shifted. From that point forward, nearly half his fortune was earmarked for education, scholarships for displaced youth, trade schools in underserved villages, libraries in places where books were rarer than gold. His wife had died young. His only son, Ahmed, had drowned in a sailing accident at 16. The distant relatives circling his estate were not family in any meaningful sense. Karim, the nephew, had surfaced only in the past year, suddenly attentive, suddenly present. Karim was 43, with the practiced smile of a man who had spent his career selling timeshares in low season. He had bounced between failed ventures, a car dealership in Sharjah, a restaurant in Deira that shuttered within 8 months, a cryptocurrency scheme that evaporated along with investor funds. No criminal charges had stuck, but the whispers followed him. Now he sat with his spine straight and his hands folded, wearing an expression of measured grief that did not quite reach his eyes. When Mr. Al-Mansur read the opening clauses, Karim's jaw tightened. On the surface, he was the picture of respectful mourning, but to anyone watching closely, and Layla was watching closely. He looked like a man waiting for a jackpot. The will was dated October 12th, just 3 weeks before Mr. Al-Rashid's final visit to the restaurant. That night, he had ordered his usual lamb mandi, but he had seemed lighter somehow, almost relieved. He had told Layla's manager that he had finally settled his affairs, that his conscience was clear. The manager had relayed the comment the next day. Now, as the lawyer droned on about clauses and codicils, Layla tried to reconcile that lightness with what she was hearing. The document on the table bequeathed the entirety of the Al-Rashid fortune, an estimated $1.7 billion to Karim. No mention of the schools, no mention of the foundation the billionaire had spent years planning, just a single beneficiary. The reading continued. Layla circled the table to refill cups, and as she passed behind Karim, she caught a glint of something on his face, not grief, not gratitude, but something sharper: satisfaction. He caught her looking, and his expression curdled into irritation. She averted her eyes quickly, heart pounding, but the moment planted a splinter of doubt that would not dislodge. The calligraphy of the signature was elaborate, a classic Diwani Jali script with intricate looping flourishes that announced authority and authenticity. To the assembled lawyers and relatives, it was beautiful. To Layla, it was a lie. She had seen Mr. Al-Rashid sign receipts at the restaurant, quick flicks of a gold-plated pen, always with a slight tremor in the upper strokes. His hand was older, and he had a mild essential tremor that his doctors monitored. That tremor was nowhere in this signature. The flourishes were too symmetrical, the line weight too consistent, the spacing mathematically perfect. Human hands do not produce such uniformity. She thought of her grandfather's lessons. If every aleph looks exactly identical, you are looking at a printout, not a signature. The tension in the room shifted when Mr. Al-Mansur reached the signature page. The lawyer held it up, a white sheet with black ink, authenticated by 2 witnesses whose names Layla did not recognize. The witnesses, Mr. Al-Mansur explained, were employees of Karim's former car dealership, both of whom had signed affidavits swearing they saw Mr. Al-Rashid execute the will. There was a brief murmur of acceptance. The family members, though disappointed, were not surprised. Karim exhaled slowly, as if a heavy weight had been lifted. But Layla's hands were trembling as she set down the coffee pot. She knew what she was seeing. She also knew what it would cost to speak. A waitress, an immigrant, a woman whose residency visa depended on her employer's goodwill. She had no standing, no credibility, nothing but the truth of her own eyes. Yet the thought of those schools, those children sitting in the dust, pushed her forward. She edged toward the lead attorney, her heart hammering against her ribs. She would whisper something small, something deferential, planting a seed without uprooting her own life. But before she could reach him, Karim's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman with a tablet full of notarized documents, noticed the hesitation. She called out, her voice slicing through the murmur. "Excuse me, why is the server hovering by the documents?" Every head in the room turned. Layla froze, the silver coffee pot trembling in her grip. Karim's lawyer, a woman named Nadia, rose from her chair with the precision of a blade leaving its sheath. "I asked you a question. Why are you standing near confidential documents?" Her voice was polished but sharp enough to draw blood. Layla opened her mouth but no words came. She felt the floor tilt. Mr. Al-Mansur held up a hand, his expression shifting from ceremony to cautious curiosity. "Miss, if you have something to say it now." Layla set down the pot. Her throat burned with the weight of everything she had learned as a child in that Damascus workshop. "The signature," she finally whispered. "It is not his." The silence that followed was volcanic. Karim's face calcified into a mask of controlled fury. His lawyer laughed, a dry, dismissive sound. "A waitress is going to authenticate a will? This is absurd." But Mr. Al-Mansur did not laugh. He had been practicing law for 40 years, and he had learned that truth sometimes arrived in unexpected voices. He asked Layla to step forward. She walked slowly, feeling the glare of the family members like heat from an open furnace. She pointed to the Diwani Jali script, tracing the air above the looping flourishes. "Look at the meme here and here, they are identical. A human hand cannot do that. Even masters vary the stroke pressure. These lines were plotted by a machine." She explained the essential tremor that had marked Mr. Al-Rashid's hand for years. This signature is perfect, too perfect. My grandfather taught me that every hand leaves a record of its own imperfection. This has none. Karim slammed his palm on the table. This is a setup. Someone has bribed this woman to delay the probate while they search for another will. His lawyer nodded, already typing on her tablet. We will file a motion to proceed immediately. The witnesses have sworn to the authenticity. But Mr. Almansa had seen something in Layla's quiet certainty that unsettled him. He called for a recess. The family milled in confusion. Karim strode out with his legal team, shooting one final glare at Layla, a glare that promised consequences. She stood alone near the window, the glittering Dubai skyline outside, indifferent to the earthquake happening within her chest. A junior associate approached and gently asked her to stay, sensing that her testimony was not yet finished. By late evening, Mr. Almansa had contacted a forensic document examiner named Dr. Rashid Kazmi, a handwriting specialist with 20 years of experience in Arabic calligraphy authentication. Dr. Kazmi was based in Abu Dhabi, but agreed to examine the will under emergency protocol. He arrived at the firm's office the next morning, carrying a portable lab kit that included a digital microscope and spectral imaging tools. In a private conference room, with only Mr. Almansa and a notary present, Dr. Kazmi placed the will under a high-resolution scanner. His assistant, a young technician, calibrated the infrared filters to distinguish ink composition. The room was silent except for the hum of machinery. Layla waited outside, sipping water, her nerves frayed. The first thing Dr. Kazmi noticed was the ink, a standard commercial fountain pen ink, consistent in color but lacking the expected agging pattern. When he examined the signature under ultraviolet light, he found no indentation from pen pressure, no groove, no variation. The loops traced a predetermined vector path. He muttered to himself, "This is vector art, not writing." He pulled up a font database and found a Diwani Jali digital typeface that matched the signature's metrics within a 98% similarity. The signature had been stamped, then traced over with a pen to simulate authenticity. The forger had scanned a real document signed by Mr. Al-Rashid, isolated the signature, smoothed out the tremor, and printed a ghost image, then inked it by hand, mimicking the surface-level beauty but missing the organic unpredictability of a living hand. When Dr. Kazmi presented his preliminary findings to Mr. Almansa, the lawyer's face went pale. He immediately called the police. The will, which had been mere hours from probate, was now a piece of evidence in a fraud investigation. Karim and his lawyer were summoned back to the office, but they did not come alone. They arrived with a battalion of rival attorneys, demanding that the examination be dismissed as biased, claiming that the waitress had conspired with the family to discredit them. Karim's voice boomed through the corridors. "She is an illegal immigrant trying to buy her citizenship with lies." That accusation hit Layla like a physical blow. Her visa was, in fact, tied to her employment, and her employer had strict rules about employee conduct. She had not sought this. She had only tried to tell the truth. Now her entire life in the Emirates hung in the balance. Her apartment, her income, her ability to support her aging parents back in Syria, all of it could vanish if the wrong people pressed the wrong buttons. Yet the thought of the schools, of the children who would never see a classroom if Karim won, gave her a stubborn courage. She refused to recant. She told the authorities everything, exactly as she had seen it. The investigation took a sharp turn when detectives interviewed the two witnesses who had supposedly watched Mr. Al-Rashid sign the will. One of them, a former car salesman named Hassan, broke down under questioning. He admitted he had been paid 50,000 dirhams by Karim to sign the affidavit. He had never met Mr. Al-Rashid. The second witness, a woman named Aisha, initially held firm but eventually confessed after being shown bank records tracing a payment from a shell company owned by Karim. The entire witness testimony was a fabrication. The notary who had stamped the will was also under suspicion. His seal had been used, but he claimed he had lost a blank page of notarized paper months earlier. With the witness evidence crumbling, the forensic findings became irrefutable. Courts in the UAE take forgery charges with extreme seriousness. Karim was arrested at his apartment that night, his smug composure finally shattered. He had nearly inherited a fortune that was never meant for him, but the case was not yet over. The question remained, where was the real Will? Layla remembered something. A quiet conversation months earlier in the corner of Al-Fahidi's restaurant late at night. Mr. Al-Rashid had been unusually talkative. He had told her that he had placed his true testament in a place no one would think to look, a locked box in the care of an old friend who owed him a life debt. He had whispered the name, Jamila, a retired teacher who ran a small library in the Al-Fahidi historical neighborhood. He had said, "If anything happens to me, tell Jamila to open the poetry cabinet." Now, with the police investigation accelerating, Mr. Al-Mansur and Layla traced that clue. The library was a humble space, filled with dusty books and the scent of old paper. Jamila, a woman in her 70s with silver-threaded hair, listened to their story with tears in her eyes. She led them to a wooden cabinet carved with verses from Al-Mutanabi. Inside, hidden beneath a stack of poetry manuscripts, was a sealed metal box. Mr. Al-Mansur opened it with trembling hands. Inside lay a will, dated just 2 weeks before the forged document's date, but this one bore the unmistakable, slightly tremulous signature of Mr. Al-Rashid. The content was clear. His entire fortune, except for a small trust for distant relatives, was to fund the Al-Rashid Education Foundation, to build schools across Yemen, Somalia, and Syria for underprivileged children of all backgrounds. The very dream he had spoken of to Layla during those late-night meals. The news of the real Will's discovery spread rapidly. The family members, initially disappointed, found a strange peace in honoring their late relative's true wishes. The courts validated the authentic will within weeks. Karim, facing fraud, perjury, and conspiracy charges, was sentenced to 7 years in prison. His lawyer, Nadia, was disbarred for her role in orchestrating the forgery. The notary fled the country, but was apprehended in Cairo. Layla became an unlikely hero. The story of the waitress who saw what everyone else missed went viral. She was offered jobs in law firms, scholarships to study forensic document examination, and a permanent residency visa granted directly by the Emirates leadership in recognition of her integrity. But she remained what she had always been, a woman who carried her grandfather's lessons in her heart and who believed that truth could be found in the smallest details if one only had the courage to look. 2 months later, the foundation broke ground on its first school in a refugee camp in Jordan. Layla was invited to attend the ceremony. She stood among children who would now have a future, and she thought of the old man who had drawn blueprints on napkins. But as the speeches ended and the applause faded, a note was slipped into her hand. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the message was ice cold. "You think this is over. It is not. You exposed a forgery, but you cannot expose what you don't see coming. Watch your back, waitress." Layla's hand tightened around the paper, and the desert wind carried the sound of a distant storm. The real battle for Al-Rashid's legacy had just begun. Layla read the note 3 times, the paper trembling despite the desert's stillness. She spun around, scanning the dispersing crowd of dignitaries and children, but no one met her gaze. Just smiling faces, proud teachers, and the distant silhouette of a construction crane. The threat felt surreal against the backdrop of hope, but her grandfather had taught her to trust her instincts, and every instinct now screamed that she was in danger. She folded the note carefully, preserving any evidence, and slipped it into her pocket. The ceremony continued. She forced a smile for the cameras, but her mind was already racing. Back in Dubai, she took the note directly to Mr. Al-Mansur. He examined it with pursed lips, then called a private security consultant. The handwriting was analyzed by Dr. Kazmi, who confirmed it was written by the same hand that had pennied the forged will, the same digital smooth strokes, the same lack of human tremor. This wasn't a random threat. It was a message from someone inside the original forgery operation, someone who knew exactly what Layla had done. The police were notified, but without a direct threat of immediate harm, they opened a file and promised to patrol her neighborhood. It felt like a formality. Layla knew that the person who sent that note wasn't afraid of the police. They were afraid of what she might uncover next. She tried to return to normalcy. She resumed her shifts at Al-Fahidi's, though her manager now treated her with a mix of pride and wariness. The restaurant became a strange pilgrimage site for journalists and well-wishers. But the normalcy was a fragile shell. A week after the ceremony, she came home to find her apartment door ajar. Her heart hammered as she stepped inside. Nothing was stolen, but her belongings had been subtly rearranged. Drawers were left a centimeter open. Her books on calligraphy were stacked in a different order. The only clear message was a single sheet of paper left on her pillow, blank except for a smudge of black ink, the same ink used in the forged will. Someone had been inside, and they wanted her to know it. She reported the break-in, and a detective named Omar took a special interest. He was a sharp, quiet man who had worked fraud cases for years and had a deep respect for forensic document examination. He arranged for a security detail, but the presence of a police car outside her building only made the watchers more subtle. Layla began noticing a black sedan with tinted windows parked near her bus stop each morning. It never moved while she watched, but it was always gone before the authorities could arrive. Meanwhile, the Al Rashid Education Foundation encountered its first major obstacle. A massive anonymous donation, pledged just days after the scandal broke, was suddenly frozen by the central bank. The funds, originating from a shell company in the Cayman Islands, were flagged as potentially linked to money laundering. The foundation's board, composed of well-meaning but politically cautious business leaders, panicked. If the public associated the foundation with criminal proceeds, all of Mr. Al-Rashid's legacy could be undone. Layla suspected Karim's network wasn't just trying to scare her, they were trying to choke the foundation itself. As the foundation's reputation wavered, Layla received an unexpected call from Dr. Kazmi. He had been reviewing the digital font file used in the forgery and had traced it back to a small design studio in Bahrain. The studio, called Al Mizan Graphics, specialized in recreating traditional calligraphy for luxury branding. But a deeper search revealed that Al Mizan had been implicated, though never charged, in several document forgery cases across the Gulf, customs papers, marriage contracts, and at least one other contested will. The pattern was too precise. A wealthy individual dies suddenly, a too perfect will appears, and the real beneficiaries are muscled out by a distant relative with criminal ties. Dr. Kazmi shared his findings with Detective Omar, and a task force was quietly assembled. Layla was asked to keep a low profile, but she couldn't. She had become the living symbol of the foundation's integrity. If she disappeared into hiding, the public would assume guilt. So she continued her public appearances, each one a calculated risk. At a charity dinner in Abu Dhabi, she felt a hand brush her back and found another note, this time tucked into her clutch purse. The message was shorter: "The foundation burns if you don't walk away." She reported it immediately. The threat had escalated from personal to institutional. The task force uncovered that Karim, from his prison cell, had been in contact with associates through a illegally smuggled phone. He was still orchestrating elements of the campaign, but Karim was not the mastermind. Bank records traced funds from an offshore entity registered in the Seychelles, controlled by a man named Youssef Al-Masri, a former financier who had been banned from the Dubai International Financial Center for fraud. Al-Masri ran a network of document forgers, money launderers, and corrupt notaries across the region. The fake will was just one node in a multi-layered operation. Mr. Al-Rashid had likely been targeted because, before his death, he had begun gathering evidence against Al-Masri's syndicate, planning to expose them through his philanthropic foundation. The forgery wasn't just about stealing the fortune, it was about silencing Al-Rashid's investigation permanently. Now Layla understood why the note said she couldn't expose what she didn't see coming. The forgery she spotted was just the tip of an iceberg that extended deep into the region's financial and legal systems. The syndicate had allies in banks, law firms, and government offices. They could forge documents, but they could also forge public records. Layla's immigration status, her work history, even her identity could be manipulated to discredit her. And indeed, within days, a local tabloid ran an anonymous story alleging that Layla had been paid off by a rival business family to fabricate the forgery claim. The story cited unnamed sources and distorted facts, but the damage was done. Her visa renewal was suspended pending a review. She found herself in a Kafkaesque nightmare, reporting to an immigration office where an unsympathetic official questioned her integrity while her lawyer, provided by Mr. Almansa, argued fiercely. Outside, the black sedan waited. Inside, she felt the walls closing in. But just as the situation seemed hopeless, Detective Omar made a breakthrough. One of al-Masri's mid-level operatives, a man named Farid, was arrested attempting to board a flight to Beirut with a laptop containing encrypted files. The files, once decrypted, contained the master templates for dozens of forged documents, including the Al-Rashid will. There was a metadata trail, the exact timestamp when the digital ghost image was created, the IP address of the computer used, and even drafts showing the signature being smoothed. It was definitive forensic proof, but the true bombshell was in another file. It contained a recording of a conversation between al-Masri and an unnamed high-ranking board member of the foundation. The board member was feeding information to the syndicate, ensuring that the foundation's reputation would be undermined from within. The call recorded the board member confirming that the waitress was becoming a liability and suggesting a more permanent solution. Detective Omar recognized the voice immediately. It was the foundation's own chairman, a man named Faisal, who had been publicly praising Layla just days earlier. This revelation hit Layla harder than any threat. The sanctuary she had helped build was corrupted at its core. Mr. Al-Rashid's dream had been infiltrated by the very criminals he sought to fight. Now the battle was not just against external enemies, but against a serpent coiled inside the foundation's heart. If she moved too publicly, the evidence could vanish. If she stayed quiet, Faisal could manipulate the board into dissolving the foundation and diverting the funds. She had to act fast. Working with Detective Omar, Dr. Kazmi, and Mr. Almansa, Layla devised a plan. They would use the foundation's upcoming gala, the one-year anniversary of Mr. Al-Rashid's death, as a stage. All board members would be in attendance, including Faisal. The task force would secure the venue, wire the chairman's phone, and lay a trap. Layla would confront him publicly with the evidence, forcing a confession on camera. It was dangerous, but it was the only way to cut out the rot and salvage the foundation's future. The night of the gala arrived. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above the same ballroom where Layla had once served coffee as an invisible server. Now she walked in as a guest of honor, a symbol of integrity. She wore a simple black dress, her grandfather's prayer beads wrapped around her wrist. She spotted Faisal across the room, his practiced smile gleaming under the lights. He approached her with outstretched arms, his voice warm and fraudulent. "Layla, you look beautiful. We are so proud of you." She returned his embrace, feeling the cool metal of a hidden microphone taped to her back. "Thank you, Mr. Faisal. There's something I need to discuss with you after the speeches. Something important." His eyes flickered just for a moment. "Of course, anything for our hero." The speeches began. The chairman's toast praised the foundation's work. Layla's heart pounded as she waited. And when the formalities ended and the crowd dispersed for refreshments, she pulled Faisal aside into a private antechamber, a room lined with mirrors and velvet curtains. Detective Omar's team was listening from a van outside. Layla faced the man who had been plotting her destruction with a calm born of absolute certainty. "I know about Al-Masri," she said softly. "I know you've been feeding him information. I have the recording." Faisal's smile didn't waver, it sharpened. "You have nothing. You're a waitress who got lucky. You think a recording will matter against my lawyers? You'll be deported before you see a courtroom." But Layla held his gaze. "I'm not the one who will judge you. The foundation's donors will. The media is waiting just outside this door. Every word you say from now on is being broadcast live to the task force." His smile finally cracked. She had lied about the broadcast, but the microphones were feeding everything to the police. Faisal took a menacing step forward, then paused, his survival instincts kicking in. He tried to change his tone to deny everything, but it was too late. The door burst open and Detective Omar entered with 3 officers. Faisal was arrested on charges of conspiracy, fraud, and attempted witness tampering. The confession he had already uttered in anger was enough to hold him. As they led him away, he snarled at Layla, "Al-Masri will finish this. You've only bought time." Layla watched him disappear, then turned to the mirror. Her reflection was steady now. The foundation was saved from its internal enemy, but the external threat remained. Al-Masri was still out there, his network vast. The battle for Mr. Al-Rashid's legacy was far from over, but Layla had proven something that the syndicate never understood. The power of a single truth, spoken by a single voice, could shatter the most elaborate lies. She straightened her dress and walked back into the ballroom, ready to face whatever came next. The war was just beginning, and this time she would not be fighting alone. The ballroom swallowed her return with a hush that spread like ink through water. Donors in silk gowns and tailored suits turned from their champagne towers, their expressions a mix of shock and admiration. The arrest of Chairman Faisal had been swift and public, and the whispers were already reshaping the evening's narrative. Layla moved through the crowd not as a server anymore, but as the woman who had pulled back the curtain on a conspiracy layered within silk and privilege. She felt the weight of every gaze, but also something new, a quiet solidarity from those who had once looked through her. Mr. Al-Mansur intercepted her near the grand staircase. His usually composed features were flushed with urgency. The media is waiting outside. They want a statement. Faisal's lawyers are already spinning the arrest as a personal vendetta. We need to control the story. Layla looked past him at the ballroom doors, beyond which cameras and microphones were assembling. She had never spoken to the press like this, not as a hero, not as a symbol. But tonight, she was no longer a waitress who noticed a wrong signature. She was the keeper of Mr. Al-Rashid's true legacy. She stepped through the doors into a storm of flashbulbs. Microphones pressed toward her like flowers of curiosity. For a heartbeat, she was back in her grandfather's workshop, watching his steady hand produce beauty from simple ink. Then she spoke, her voice clear and unwavering. Tonight, we removed a cancer from the heart of a dream. The Al-Rashid Foundation was built on one man's belief that every child deserves a classroom. A few people tried to poison that vision, but they failed. This foundation will continue. The schools will rise. And the truth will always surface. The statement spread like fire across the region. By morning, international news outlets carried the story of the waitress who had not only exposed a forged will, but also unmasked a network of corruption. Donations to the foundation surged. Governments that had hesitated now pledged support. The board, shaken by Faisal's betrayal, appointed a new chairperson, Jamila, the retired librarian who had guarded the true will. Quiet dignity restored public trust, and Layla found herself in a position she had never sought, the conscience of the foundation. But Al-Masri was still out there. The encrypted laptop seized from Farid provided a blueprint of the syndicate's operations. Detective Omar, now leading a multi-agency task force, uncovered safe houses in Amman, Bahrain, and Istanbul. Bank accounts were frozen. Mori arrests were made. The network, built over a decade of forgery and fraud, began to crumble. Yet Al-Masri himself seemed to vanish. He had stopped using phones, stopped accessing known properties. The manhunt dragged into weeks, then months. During that time, Layla did not hide. She traveled with the foundation, visiting sites where schools were under construction. She spoke at conferences on forensic document examination, sharing her grandfather's wisdom with a new generation. Her residency status was resolved with an official commendation from the Emirates leadership, granting her permanent citizenship in recognition of her service to justice. She studied calligraphy formally, blending the old with the new, and became a consultant for the same police task force that had once doubted her. One afternoon, a package arrived at her small apartment. No return address. She opened it with caution, remembering the threats. Inside was a single photograph, yellowed with age. It showed a young man in a traditional thorb, kneeling beside an old woman in a Damascus workshop, holding a reed pen. The young man was unmistakably Mr. Al-Rashid. The old woman was her great-grandmother, the one who had first taught the craft to her grandfather. A note accompanied the photo. "I never forgot who taught me the value of the written word. Your family gave me my first lesson. You gave me the last." It was a revelation that rewired everything. Mr. Al-Rashid had not been a stranger to her heritage. In his youth, before the oil and the empires, he had studied basic calligraphy from the very same lineage that shaped Layla's eye for truth. The connection had been invisible, a thread woven decades earlier, only to re-emerge when a forged signature met the trained eye of a descendant. She realized then that her presence at the will reading was not coincidence. It was an inheritance of purpose. The emotional weight of that discovery carried her through the final chapters of the pursuit. 6 months after the gala, a tip from an informant in Beirut led to al-Masri's location. He had been hiding in a modest apartment near the port, using a network of couriers to maintain control. The raid was surgical. He surrendered without violence, his empire reduced to a rented room and a stack of forged documents that would never see daylight. In his possession were blank notary seals, templates for dozens of wills, and a ledger detailing bribes to officials across 5 countries. His trial was a spectacle, but the outcome was never in doubt. The evidence gathered by the task force was overwhelming. Al-Masri was sentenced to life in prison. Karim, already incarcerated, received an additional decade for his role in the conspiracy. Faisal, the treacherous chairman, was convicted on multiple counts of fraud and sentenced to 15 years. Nadia, Karim's lawyer, disbarred and disgraced, fled the country and was still being pursued. Justice was slow, but it was complete. The foundation, cleansed and renewed, broke ground on its 100th school 2 years to the day after Mr. al-Rashid's death. Layla attended the ceremony in a village in northern Syria, not far from where her grandfather had once ground ink. She stood beside Jamila, now a dear friend, and watched children run into a courtyard painted with murals of letters and stars. The school was named after her grandfather, a tribute to the man who had taught her that every stroke tells a story. But the final surprise came quietly during a quiet moment after the speeches. A young boy, perhaps 10 years old, approached Layla with a folded paper. He had been practicing his calligraphy, he said, and wanted to show her. She unfolded the paper. The letters were uneven, shaky, full of childish hesitation, and utterly beautifully human. It was the most perfect thing she had ever seen. In the corner, he had signed his name with a flourish that reminded her of the old photographs she had studied. The boy's name was Rashid. She asked if he had any relation. He smiled and pointed to the school's dedication plaque, for the students who will carry the light forward. That night she sat beneath a canopy of stars and wrote a letter to her grandfather. She told him of the photograph, of the boy, of the schools rising from ruins. She told him that the craft he had passed down had not only saved a fortune but had reclaimed a future. The desert wind carried the scent of ink and jasmine. The war for Mr. al-Rashid's legacy had ended, and a new story had begun, one where a waitress, a pen, and the truth were enough to change the world. Layla's letter to her grandfather was never sealed. She left it open on her desk in the small apartment in Dubai, a single page among the thousands of thank you notes that now arrived from children who had never seen her face. The story of how a waitress spotted a forged calligraphy signature had become legend, but the deeper truth was simpler and sharper. In a world drowning in documents, we rarely look at the words we trust. We accept signatures, we trust seals. We believe that the paper in front of us is what it claims to be, but every stroke, every flourish, every slight tremor of a human hand leaves a record. The question is whether anyone is paying attention. Forensic document examiners will tell you that forgery is not a crime of genius. It is a crime of opportunity. The forger counts on the human willingness to see what we expect to see. In Mr. al-Rashid's case, the assembled lawyers and family saw a beautiful signature in traditional script and assumed authenticity. They saw the notary stamp, the witnesses' signatures, the lawyer's endorsement. They saw the surface. Layla saw the details beneath. Her grandfather had taught her that calligraphy is a record of the soul, and a soul cannot be digitized. That ancient knowledge, carried across generations and borders, was enough to unravel a billion-dollar fraud. The al-Rashid case also exposed something larger. Forgery is rarely an isolated act. One fake will require a network of complicit notaries, bribed witnesses, a compromised charity chairman, and a digital font designer in Bahrain willing to smooth away the tremors of a dying man's hand. The syndicate that Youssef al-Masri built had corrupted public records across 5 countries. Customs documents, marriage contracts, business registrations, all elastic in the hands of a determined forger. The task force eventually traced over 300 falsified documents to al-Masri's network, each one a quiet injustice that had cost someone their home, their inheritance, or their freedom. Layla's calligraphic eye pierced the surface of just one. How many others remain hidden? The schools that Mr. Al-Rashid dreamed of are now tangible. Walking through their courtyards, you see children who will grow up knowing that a stranger fought for their future. You see libraries named after Jamila, the librarian who kept faith. You see forensic labs named after Dr. Kazmi, where new examiners learn to distinguish the human from the machine. And in every classroom, there is a single framed image, a young man kneeling beside an old woman in a Damascus workshop, learning the art of the reed pen. It is a reminder that knowledge is not only power, it is protection. Layla herself still works. Not as a waitress, but as a consultant for document authentication. She trains young women and men to look closely, to question the too perfect, to trust the instinct that says something is wrong. She carries her grandfather's prayer beads, and when asked how she found the courage to speak, she answers simply, "I had seen the truth. Keeping silent would have been a forgery of myself." Not everyone who spots a forgery will challenge a billionaire's nephew. Not everyone will risk deportation or face a syndicate. But every time someone looks twice at a document, questions an inconsistency, or refuses to accept a lie dressed in official ink, they honor the same principle. The truth is rarely hidden in code. It is hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone with the patience to see. If this story moved you, if it reminded you to look closer at the things you take for granted, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel for more stories of courage, compassion, and the hidden threads that connect us all. Leave a comment telling us, what would you do if you realized a single word could change everything? And wherever you are watching from, know that your attention is a kind of power. Use it wisely. We'll see you in the next one.